So here it is, the Samsung Gear 2, the successor to the original Galaxy Gear, but this time around without the Galaxy branding. There were a lot of flaws with the original Galaxy Gear, but Samsung is looking to rectify all of that with the Gear 2, starting with the hardware. It's still comprised of metal on both the face and the clasp, which gives it a very premium look and feel with textured black bands which are now removable, whereas on the original they were not. Just from the hardware alone, the Gear 2 feels much more refined in comparison to the original. It still has an industrial look without trying so hard to look industrial with visible screws. It's smaller, more compact, and lightweight, and they've done a much better job at concealing the watch's actual hardware, making the Gear 2 look a little more like a normal watch. Like the camera module, for example, which no longer protrudes from the watch itself, or the speaker, which is now hidden on the underside of the watch face versus being on the metal clasp. And the power button, which also doubles as a home button, has been moved to the front. Even the charging accessory is a lot smaller now. It's not that big, bulky, awkward to use charger that we saw with the Galaxy Gear. And if you're wondering just exactly how small, here it is next to a quarter. And a micro SD card. It's got some new hardware as well, like the inclusion of an IR blaster to control your TV, and a heart rate monitor, just like the Galaxy S5. The display hasn't changed much, if at all, so there's not much to really say about it. It's still a 1.63-inch display with 320 by 320 resolution, and it's very bright and vivid, making it very easy to see outdoors. It's a nicely sized display, making it very comfortable to glance at small bits of information without making the watch larger than it really needs to be. If you're wondering exactly how big the Gear 2 is in comparison to a normal watch, it's really not that big at all. Here it is in comparison to a few G-Shocks that I own, and if anything, the Gear 2 is smaller in practically every dimension. It's also very light, coming in at 68 grams, making it very comfortable to wear for long periods of time. I can't imagine anyone out there right now wanting to buy a wearable based on its internal specs, but if you really want to know, it is a slight bump from the original with a 1 GHz dual-core processor, 512 megabytes of RAM, and 4 gigs of internal storage. The performance is smooth and responsive whether you're swiping or opening up apps, and very seldom did I ever find myself having to repeat a tap or gesture because it didn't register. The camera, on the other hand, is still pretty much more of the same, coming in at a whopping 2 megapixels. Like I mentioned earlier, it's much better integrated into the body of the watch, but don't expect much from it. After all, we're talking about a 2 megapixel camera on a watch here. If taking pictures or recording short clips from your watch is important to you, then the Gear 2 is definitely the one to get, and you can also have the files automatically transferred to your phone for easy viewing. One of the biggest shifts from the Galaxy Gear to the Gear 2 is the software. The Gear 2 is running on Samsung's own Tizen platform, whereas the Galaxy Gear ran Android, but the overall functionality is still pretty much the same. You still have all the same basic apps like the dialer, contacts, email, the ability to check your notifications, and for better or worse, Samsung's own S-Voice is still present here as well. Samsung's also been really big on pushing fitness for the last year or so, and on top of the heart rate monitor that I mentioned earlier, there's also an entire exercise app for measuring running, walking, cycling, and hiking, and how many calories you've burned. You've also got a pedometer to measure your steps, and I'm not sure if it's a connectivity issue or just a bug, but it tended to freeze a lot and all of a sudden your steps would just skyrocket, so it was hard to really gauge how accurate the pedometer actually is. And if you want, you can also monitor your sleep, which I actually did just once to see exactly what it was measuring. Turns out not only does it measure how long you sleep, but how long you lay motionless while you sleep. Some apps that I found useful, and I think most people will too, is the Find My Device and MIDI controller. With Find My Device, not only can you use it to locate your phone, but the watch as well through Samsung's own Gear Manager app, provided the two are still connected and in range. With MIDI controller, you can control your music on your phone directly from your watch, so you can pause, play, and skip tracks, and it doesn't have to be from Samsung's music player either. I used it for Google Play Music, and it worked great, and it was actually rather convenient.